Ladies and gentlemen, coming soon, a podcast you've all been waiting for. The movie podcast to end all movie podcasts. A podcast that discusses and critiques the best of the best and the worst of the worst movies playing at a theater near you. With a host whose opinions have been deemed as fact by your favorite fact checkers. And that's a fact. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the movie maestro, the tyrant of theater, the gumshoe of review, the man that makes theater employees and Hollywood execs shiver by his mere presence. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge, the jury, the sultan of cinema, Justin Henson. Welcome to the Movie Wire.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. We've got a big show this week with 3 brand new reviews, with 2 playing in theaters, and we continue our 2024 cleanup with the Golden Globe nominated film, Queer. This week on the show, it's not what's outside that should scare you in Wolfman. A man's greatest obsession, love, lust, sex, and the quest for drugs to give him telekinetic power. And finally, the show must end. Pamala Anderson stars in The Last Showgirl. We've got a lot to cover this week, so let's jump right in. Ready for my verdict? Let's get into it.
Out of the windows to watch a roar and a bursting of flame. The Movie Wire podcast.
There it is.
You need people like me.
The Wire.
And here we go.
A family at a remote farmhouse is attacked by an unseen animal. But as the night stretches on, the father begins to transform into something unrecognizable in Wolfman.
We have to leave right now. Run.
Hello? Can anyone hear me? Hello? We were in an accident.
Daddy, are we gonna die?
No, it's my job to protect you.
And we were attacked. I think my husband was infected. Mike. Mike. Mike.
Daddy? Daddy? What's wrong with Daddy?
He got sick.
What is happening to me?
Can you understand me? Yeah. You're hearing me. You're scaring me.
Back off! Please, Daddy's mean. Hurry, Mommy is coming. Come on.
Now, Wolfman has 2 equal parts of characters. Characters that do some very smart things and characters that do some very dumb things. With a lot of added running that as the movie runs out of steam, our characters seem to run faster to generate a pace, to give the impression that the movie is faster than what it really is. Now, I had high hopes for this movie, and it gave me an expectation during one scene towards the beginning. The scene involved our main family running into a house and taking a piece piece of furniture to block a door. Now, usually in a scene like this, my eyes would roll to the back of my head because I absolutely hate scenes like this. Like a piece of furniture is really gonna stop a door from being opened with no leverage. It's stupid. While this bookcase, this piece of furniture, was being loaded towards the back of a door, I kept thinking, for the love of God, put something else to help hold it in place. Wood against the wall, another piece of furniture, a fucking broomstick. But then something happened. The movie outsmarted me. Our main character, Blake, played by Christopher Abbott, actually does something smart. Actually takes a piece of wood, lays it on the floor, and nails it into the floor in front of the bookcase to stop the bookcase from moving. I took note of it because I would have even thought to do that. Here, as a viewer, I'm saying just put more furniture against the bookcase, and this guy, being smarter than I am, is actually nailing leverage into the floor to stop it from moving at all. The film, within 20 minutes, started to give me some buy-in on the believability of what you would do if a werewolf is chasing you. Wolfman was directed by Leigh Whannell, who usually I'm a fan of with his understanding of tone, colors, and lighting, with films under his belt such as Insidious Chapter 3, Upgrade, and 2020's Invisible Man. Whannell has shown a comfort in creating a tone that can be engaging in itself, especially with The Invisible Man. Here, Whannell brings a tone of dread we saw from The Invisible Man that does highlight the characters when it comes to tone and focus, but also uses these clever wide-angle camera shots, lighting, and also along with a score by Benjamin Wallfish to pay homage to monster films of the 40s. Right from the get-go, we have this homage but a contemporary telling of a 40s monster film. Within the first scene, we are introduced to what would be the first semi-sighting of our creature, with our young Blake, played by Zach Chandler, out on a hunting trip, but with alternative motives from his stern father, Grady, played by Ben Pendergast, who gives a well-written speech about survival with a line delivered stating death is the easy part of life. Survival is the challenge, with a pledge to teach his son survival. Then fast forward 30 years later, Blake now lives with his daughter Ginger and his wife Charlotte, played by Julia Gardner. The marriage has obvious issues, along with both Charlotte and Blake having issues from being a workaholic to dealing with anger of not knowing how to deal with his internal emotions. Blake receives a certificate of death and the keys to his father's home, and the family decides to take a vacation there. Now, of course, it's going to be a cabin-style house in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in the woods, a place of seclusion where no one, I guess, can hear you howl, I suppose. And you know what? I can buy into this repetitive formula because it makes sense for a monster that's supposed to be a wolf to be in a secluded environment in the woods. That is only if it's properly utilized, to make it feel fresh that we haven't seen it before. But here's my one ask. If there is a sequel, a prequel, whatever it may be, if we can just take it out of the secluded woods into something more refreshing, like, I don't know, Wolfman Takes Florida, or even a cruise ship, something a little bit more warm and inviting. There are some clever environments that can be used. If our writer isn't confident enough to use the same type of atmosphere, same type of environment to execute something that feels fresh. Because we don't get that execution here, it doesn't feel fresh. It might as well have been something different. I mean, we had Vampire in Brooklyn, Jason Takes Manhattan, even in Jack Frost 2, where even a fucking snowman is in a tropical environment. If a snowman can go to the tropics, so can a fucking wolf. The point is, for any environment to work, one is going to be more challenging than the next. Whether you have an unrealistic, something you've never seen before environment like the tropics with Wolfman, or a repetitive one like the Oregon or the Pacific Northwest. This has to feel new to an audience. The creative team can't be lazy with it. You have to either add substance, scares, or something new for us to look at. Here, our writers Corbett Tuck and our writer-director Leigh Whannell start on a high note, but we can tell they have no idea where they wanted to go during the back half of the film, as we rush into getting into our werewolf on screen so soon. After we're introduced to the family and our monster, it's just a lot of barricading doors, holding doors, running into every room of the house, running in the woods. It's like I was watching Home Alone just without the traps. What's missing from Wolfman is the actual build. Whannell does a great job on building the environment to an extent where we are allowed to take in his vision of darkness and dread through panned out shots, but where the disconnect is giving us a feeling of seclusion. Whittle uses the strategy of just pure darkness without utilizing the surrounding elements. This setting, this house, the woods, the setting was obviously picked for a specific reason, and they are underutilizing it and covered it in mainly just darkness instead of using it to its advantage. The only build that we see is a main focal point of our Wolfman as we slowly see him transform, but our filmmakers are so focused on the look what I can do when it comes to the gross out factor and special effects, there is nothing of added substance or dialogue to help develop these characters to make them anywhere near interesting. As I watched this film, I could see opportunity after opportunity to do something with our Wolfman as he slowly progresses, but we are just left with a pile of close-up shots of falling off fingernails, blood, and teeth falling out, which makes sense on why there's no dialogue during the build of the transition of the Wolfman, because the Wolfman must have had some jaw pain as we see a tooth fall out every 5 fucking minutes. Obviously, the Wolfman was pissed he had a toothache. But here's the good, which mostly happens in actions and dialogue in the first half of the movie, mostly the first act. We have some sharp dialogue and the family interactions between Charlotte and Blake. Even though short-lived, I will still give a little bit of credit. The troubled marriage is believable, and Julia Gardner's performance is well-rounded until the last half, in which I can only critique her running skills. And her running skills were good. It was a 4 stars on the running skills. Gardner being 12 years younger than me, I got tired just watching her run for 40 freaking minutes. Watching her run for 40 freaking minutes made me rethink my exercise routine in case I was chased by a wolf. But then I realized the overall laziness in the second half, and I had to rethink my rethink of the exercise routine. And I just called it simple and grabbed another bourbon. Now, when it comes to the werewolf itself, for a movie that rushes to make this monster relevant and on screen, the presentation is underwhelming. Some of the shots of transformations can look pretty cool, but the actual outcome is something that I would see sleeping on the sidewalk on the Seattle streets. A balding, growling man with no clothes and a lot of patchy back hair. Which begs the question, was this a budget issue or a vision issue? I thought back to 2010's The Wolfman with Anthony Hopkins, 15 years ago, and that had a more convincing monster. Wolfman does try and tie in some messaging, but it's quiet messaging that the film doesn't do anything with. It almost plays the strategy of 1923's Wolfman, where a man turns into a wolf anytime he drinks alcohol. The filmmakers leave the topic of why a man turns into a monster, like alcoholism, or in this case, anger, or even some may take the pain that leads to anger of not being relevant to ones we love. It feeds on the why and leaves it as just that. It's just an origin story with messaging at a mere surface level. Wolfman is a monster movie first and not a very original one, and messaging last. The messaging Wolfman presents is simplistic enough where in theory should work here, but as a movie in its second half turns it into limited dialogue with a lot of running and hiding, the movie decides to drop messaging altogether and leave us with what would feel like an unsatisfied climax. It doesn't know what it wants to be, monster movie or messaging or none of the above. We know we should feel something by the time the climax hits, but there isn't enough puzzle pieces in the box to finish the puzzle. Now, Wolfman has a lot of technical dazzlement, some good writing in the first half, and good performances in the first half, but sadly, that's only in the first half of the movie. The movie shoves all the good ideas to the front and leaves nothing over the back half, where we are left with just sitting and waiting for the characters to stop running and hiding to just show us something of interest. But Wolfman never gets there and leaves us with just a forgettable, useless ending that will define this movie as such. Forgettable. I'm giving Wolfman 2 stars.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure you check out my reviews for movies that just became available to rent, buy, or stream now.
Now available on video cassette.
Feel it all. Speed, power, action, chaos, and Sonic the Hedgehog 3 that speeds its way to be the best of the franchise, receiving 3 stars. Go with the flow and one of the best animated features this year in Flow which is now the best animated feature at the Golden Globes, which stands on all fours in a hypnotic, beautiful animated journey, receiving 4 stars. Villains aren't born, they're made. His Hunt Begins, and Raven the Hunter, which received 1 star, which sounds more like a Sony Pictures tagline. So let's try this again. Sony wasn't born, it was made, and they made a pretty shitty movie, so let the internet hunt begin. Everyone deserves a chance to fly in the book to Broadway to the big screen adaptation of Wicked, which brought down the house with nobody underneath, receiving 3.5 stars. What we do in life echoes an eternity, and Gladiator 2, which felt like an eternity to get through, receiving 2 stars. On New Year's Eve, 1999, the Y2K bug changed the world forever in Y2K, which felt like the movie was more of an inconvenience than what actually happened during Y2K. The greatest story ever told by the worst kids in history of the world in the greatest Christmas pageant ever, which is the best Christmas present you will get this Christmas, receiving 3.5 stars. Question everything in Heretic, which challenges the mind with questions and knows that can be scarier than the scariest monster, receiving 3 stars. Till death do they part, witness the epic conclusion in Venom the Last Dance, which made Magic Mike's Last Dance feel like an Italian opera, receiving 1.5 stars. Then finally, One Man's Doubt could change everything in Juror Number 2, which in this film's court of law was proven one of the best movies of the year, receiving 3.5 stars. Make sure you check out those movies in my previous episodes, and while you do, don't forget to hit follow, subscribe, and please don't forget to hit that review button on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Now, before we get into the last set of reviews, there is a podcast that not only is part of my weekly listening routine, but I have also joined them in some fantastic movie discussions. They're truly a couple of stand-up gents, and that's with Josh and Alex over the Talking Smac Podcast. Make sure you check them out, listen, and subscribe to their show. The link to that show will be in the description of this episode. But let's hear from Josh and Alex over the Talking Smac Podcast now.
Hey Josh, I'm finally ready to do something fun every Wednesday.
Alex, finally! We're going to talk superheroes, movies, animation, comics, and much, much more, right?
Yes, but we're also going to talk Star Trek.
Make it so, my friend. Catch Talking Smac every Wednesday on your podcatcher of choice. We will see you there, Smackheads.
In 1950s Mexico City, an American immigrant in his late 40s leads a solitary life amidst a small American community. However, the arrival of a young student serves the man into finally establishing a meaningful connection with someone in the Golden Globe nominee, Queer.
We're all parts of a tremendous whole. A curse. There's no use fighting it.
The difficulty is to convince someone else he is really part of you.
You think he's queer? I've been spending time with him. I can't tell.
Well, could always just ask.
No. I want to talk to you without speaking. Why don't you come with me?
Door's already open, can't close it now. All he can do is look away. But why would you?
Now, here's another 2024 cleanup that we may see pop up during the Oscars, more specifically for Best Performance by Daniel Craig, and that's the movie Queer. Now, Queer was one of those movies that I walked into not knowing what it's about, who did it. I walked in blind, and this is going to be a tough one for me. I love the performances, I love the edge, I love the cinematography, and the editing is on point. But during my viewing, I couldn't help feel that I've seen this movie before. And by the time it reached the climax, I realized that this movie reminded me of 1991's David Cronenberg's Naked Lunch. Just instead of giant bugs, we get Oscar-worthy blowjob scenes. And honestly, I can't think of a time in recent memory that an actor's been given an award for Best Actor without speaking a word of dialogue, but if there was one handed out, Daniel Craig should get it. Daniel Craig goes all in with his vocal capabilities. He even made the straight men stand up and applaud. Anyway, as I sat and did my research and started to do my review for the film Queer, what I realized of my feeling of where I've seen this movie before wasn't just Cronenberg's Naked Lunch, but yet this was another adaptation of William S. Burroughs' novels, who also wrote Naked Lunch. So the familiarity was right. Should I have felt the familiarity of Naked Lunch while watching this movie? Or should I have seen a new vision or a new kind of storytelling? This is either a tribute to Burroughs or it's a movie that should have stand on its own, in which this is going to be up for interpretation of how you view this movie. If you're a Burroughs fan or even a Cronenberg fan, this one will be resonant with you and you might actually like it. But this is going to follow the same type of tone, so let's get into this. Now, I know that Burroughs novels are a tough vision to adapt, and that might be why I had a problem with the movie Queer, is the fact they are difficult to deconstruct. And instead of director Luca Guadagnino putting his vision of tone, pacing, and vision into it, it feels like the same movie without the special effects. The adaptation, written by new writer Justin Kritzkes, who also wrote one of my favorites from last year, Challengers. Kritzkes does flex his muscles to deconstruct Burroughs' thought process in this adaptation, which does again feel borrowed or from the same universe of Naked Lunch, because we get some of the same themes, just more in a deconstructed way of feeling love or being wanted by sexual expression in the 50s, and being in a drug-induced world to cope with society's non-acceptance of homosexual relationships. Or even taking it further, the denial of oneself to go with society's expectations. Like Naked Lunch, we get random pacing, drug-induced decision-making, a journey of discovery of truth, or in this case, to find a drug that gives the ability of telekinesis. William Lee, played brilliantly by Daniel Craig, lives in Mexico City, mainly spending his time in bars seeking out sex, especially with younger men, until he finds a connection with one Eugene, played by Drew Starkley. William, just like a drug, becomes addicted and obsessed with Eugene. Even though Eugene doesn't find himself as, quote, queer, Eugene also enjoys the company of women. Of course, this upsets William, and he desperately seeks acceptance and love and companionship from Eugene. With the desperation of keeping Eugene as company, invites him to South America for a price for his company and to seek out a drug called Yaji that is allegedly able to give him telekinetic abilities. Now, I'm a fan of Luca Guadagnino, from Bones and All Suspiria to Challengers, of course. I love his focus on adding edge to the characters on screen, but there's still a piece of me after watching this movie now twice that it feels too close to Naked Lunch in its intent, tone, and feel, that I didn't find it as a standalone Guadagnino film, but rather a mimic to a Cronenberg film. After my second watch, it's hard to tell if Guadagnino's vision was intentional to make it feel like the same universe as Naked Lunch, or to use Cronenberg's vision as a baseline to continue Burroughs' vision. But with that said, even with Naked Lunch being a love or hate it kind of movie, Queer flows kind of the same way, where you have to be committed to abstract storytelling to try to make something from it, and trying to do that by one watch, that won't happen. And even in my case with two viewings, it still might not happen. And this is a movie I may have to watch a couple more times down the road to really grasp it. But I have to say, I was disappointed because this just felt like a watered down version of Naked Lunch. Even at its most bizarre, Naked Lunch still had interesting characters to follow. And even though here with the movie Queer, even though we had a fantastic performance by Craig, the written character isn't that interesting. We bank on the situation that William's in as supplement to the encouragement for character development, or something more from our William character. Our William character, we don't really see a believable development, at least in my eyes. We just see the situations running around him to kind of boost this character up, to make it feel like it's evolving, but really, he is not. He is the same character from point A to point B. It's a very surface level character that adds on situational basis to make it feel like like he's actually something more than what he is. Even from the last 60 seconds of the movie, we don't really get anything more. We get silence that really doesn't show us who this character has become. Queer will bank on the situationals and the idea of what drugs lead to. If we are to compare it to Naked Lunch or even Burroughs as a character, who I want to say is called Lee, because we have our character William Lee here and we have Bill Lee from Naked Lunch. These two are almost the same character. This is Burroughs trying to output his thought and his vision of his own life. And we saw that in Naked Lunch, but Naked Lunch did it a lot better. Here we kind of just get the sexual nature of what Burroughs' thought process is, but we don't get really any substance or vision or roadmap to where he wants to lead us to. And that's not the fault of Burroughs, that's the fault of the vision of our filmmakers and our writers here. The story never really feels intended to evolve Craig, and Daniel Craig, we can tell, does attempt to give it his all. With Burrow movie adaptations between Naked Lunch and Queer, they have created two kinds of asking ourselves, what? By the time we leave the theater. We have the what in the fuck did I just witness, and I need to go back and watch this movie to find out what I just saw, or in this case, we just get the basic what the fuck. In which the movie doesn't give enough intrigue to really push the rewatch value. And with a movie that demands thought in its bizarre storytelling, that's a big problem. But for me, honestly, I will rewatch Queer again, but not necessarily to understand the movie, but rather to understand Burroughs' thought process and tie that into the actual novels, to see what our filmmakers see. Queer is a good study piece, just like Naked Lunch on a novel-to-film adaptation, with the topic at hand of execution of vision. And coincidentally, Naked Lunch will be on an upcoming episode of our crossover show, Back to the Balcony, coming soon, so make sure you look for that on YouTube. Queer, again, is a film that you'll either love it or hate it for most. But for me, it's hard to decide. And I have a feeling this movie, I'm going to change my rating here in the near future. Mainly because this movie, at this time, felt too familiar. But a devolved version of Naked Lunch, before I even knew it was an adaptation from the same author. But at the same time, it does so much right on the technical side, from its tone, visuals, editing, the things I love from Naked Lunch. It's hard for me to say I didn't like it, but it just, again, feels way too familiar. But at the same time, the problem I have is with the adaptation of the story and the written characters. And I hate to say I have a problem with the adaptation, because I do have to give credit here, that given he's only done 2 films, Justin Korinsky still gets credit for such a challenging author to adapt. Even though Queer is a near miss for me, I cannot wait to see what Korinsky writes next, along with composers Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor, who again deliver a mesmerizing score. I'm giving Queer just, again, a near miss at 2.5 stars. Shelley, a seasoned showgirl played by Pamela Anderson, must plan for her future when her stage show, Le Razzle Dazzle, abruptly closes after a 30-year run. In the Golden Globe nominee for Best Actress and Best Original Song is The Last Showgirl.
Places, please. Places, please. This is your places call for the final performance of the Razzle Dazzle.
I mean, Las Vegas used to treat us like movie stars. These costumes, sets. We were ambassadors for style and grace. The Las Vegas Showgirl. The iconic American showgirl.
You have an act prepared?
I do. I'm a dancer.
Music?
Yeah. I gave it to the maestro.
Hold your cards close.
Feeling seen, feeling beautiful. That is powerful. And I can't imagine my life without it. Doing a job that you don't really love That's hard.
We have stories that give us the rise and fall based on drug use and alcoholism that led to tragedy. Then we have movies that give us a rise and fall based on mere tragedy. And somewhere at the top before we hit the fall lies a reflection of the middle of what we've missed along the journey. Both is a different feeling of tragedy and loss. One is the loss of fame and fortune, and the other is just the loss of time. Shelley, played by Pamela Anderson, is a 57-year-old showgirl for a 30-year running Las Vegas show that in her 20s got the gig of this popular show that solely banked on her looks and sex appeal. Sounds somewhat familiar for our leading lady Pamela Anderson's career, for when she first got her role in Baywatch in her mid-20s, and then not so much after that after Barbed Wire. Now, it's hard for me to relate to the job of a Las Vegas showgirl. I'd probably be laughed or booed off stage, especially if I tried a trick with a broomstick that we see in the film. But what I can relate to is the mentality of the want to be relevant and the want to be remembered. But as the Last Showgirl teaches us, is when we mentally feel the accomplishment of feeling wanted or relevant, we hold on to that feeling with dear life, and at times can be a level of obsession where we ignore all surrounding elements, the true things that matter in life, the people, or even financial freedom. And this also gives us a level of fear of change or growth, the fear of starting over to seek that feeling all over again. Nobody wants to start over to seek for that feeling. We don't look towards the future to see what will become. Even though the movie sets the idea of messaging right from the first 2 minutes on screen, what really ensures we hang on to this story is the deep relatability of the human desire for relevance and the fear of change. Being a showgirl or not, the position is just the driver of the message, not just an occupation to relate to. Shelley resonates with anyone who has ever felt the need to be remembered and to succeed. The film does succeed in capturing the obsession with holding on to a sense of accomplishment and the fear of starting over. Now, it has been a while since we've seen Pamela Anderson in film, and well, just to be clear, let me rephrase, anything really notable. And by the time The Last Showgirl finishes, I begin to wonder why we haven't seen her. She relates deeply as a connection level to this character. Pamela Anderson delivers a good performance here, bringing depth and relatability to her role. Her portrayal of Shelley's struggles and regrets is both relatable and, again, tragic. The film's reflection on the loss of fame, fortune, and time hits one on a deeper level that we can see shine through Anderson's performance, as she has lived through what Shelley is going through to an extent. Now, when it comes to Pamela Anderson's performance, is it a groundbreaking performance? No, but for Anderson, it is, but also it's a believable and convincing performance. Between The Last Showgirl and depending on the upcoming Naked Gun remake, Anderson is in a good position to really show her range as an actress, something that we haven't seen from the last couple of decades. But also here is Jamie Lee Curtis as Annette, another showgirl that left the show years prior, only to wash up as a waitress at a casino. Annette plays as a good friend to Shelley, but the Trojan horse of unintended fear for change. Shelley subtly sees Annette as leaving the show as a symbol of what she could become. But as time passes for Shelley and the years go on, it gets to the point where life just makes that choice for you. As a director that Shelley auditions for that we see in the beginning and towards the last act, played by Jason Schwartzman, says, audience wants sexy, and that's not you. This is a forte on the messaging where we allow time go by based on fear of change. And even to a deeper level, we rely on physical attributes to allow us to coast through life, but those aren't sustainable. Now, even though I loved a lot about The Last Showgirl, I love the messaging, I love the execution of messaging, the biggest miss of The Last Showgirl is the written and performance of character Eddie, played by Dave Bautista. First and foremost, Bautista, I can respect the direction he's going with not trying to be the next Rock by taking on cheesy fun films and relying on his muscular build. but rather he's taking on scripts, whether they're good or bad, to push him from comedy to dramatic roles to really kind of test his range. So I can respect that piece of him. But with that said, hands down, this wasn't the role for him. And to be fair, it was the one underdeveloped written character in this film. But Bautista's betrayal at an experienced producer of 30 years, I couldn't tell if it was underperformed or if he was trying to portray complacency. His portrayal isn't really clear, and that's not just Bautista, it's a written material. But I will say this about his performance. I just am confused by it. At one point, I was getting annoyed. Bautista clears his throat so many times when he's delivering lines, it almost reminded me like a nervous tick. When Bautista wasn't comfortable in his line delivery or his performance, he would just clear his throat. It became obnoxious and distracting when trying to watch the performance. Now, I already said I love the messaging, I love the execution of the message, and this is where I do respect this movie, is that this would be so easy for a movie like this to go the showgirls route and just be about the show, the sex, and the look behind the scenes of the show, and give us that rise to fame from sex to drugs to tragedy. But our new writer, Kate Gersten, knows better. Not to get wrapped up with the behind the scenes of the show on what goes on. We get hints here and there, but it's never really a focal point. Gersten, we can tell when writing, had a message to land in her outline of the screenplay, and that message wouldn't have been landed with sex, drugs, and rock and roll scenarios, but rather ran with our characters and added situational pieces to represent regret, such as Shelley's conversations with her daughter Hannah, played by Billie Lourd, where we never get too much or too little of Hannah. It's perfectly placed in so the viewer follows what we need to know to have the audience feel what Shelley is feeling. We feel that disconnect, we feel that awkward conversation, and we get an understanding of Hannah in a very simplistic level, where Hannah, because of Shelley's lifestyle, had to live with friends or friends of the family most of her childhood. So the viewer and Shelley is left with some awkward conversations to kind of show that disconnect and to really show the example of Shelley's decisions, how we're really missing the middle, the golden times of her life, and how she missed, based on her obsession, the real loving pieces of life, the most important pieces of life, which is love, family, and people. Director Gia Coppola, who did the underrated 2020s Mainstream, still a new director. This is a great story to have her tackle, with the clear and simple understanding of Gersten's written themes. All Coppola really has to do here is ensure the character direction is there, to ensure we get an emotionally evolved cast. There isn't a lot of big production designs. This is a film that is intended to focus on characters. This is a showgirl film that really does focus on the people and the evolution of people and the themes. It is a detailed blueprint screenplay with the messaging up front and center. A perfect movie for Coppola to dig her teeth in, to really develop her muscles on character development. The Last Showgirl, when it comes to production value, isn't perfect, and I'm okay with that. Some might find it unsatisfying by the climax, but as I walked out of The Last Showgirl, the biggest win for it is the fact it knows how to add relatability and fear of change for those that are old enough to have experienced it. This also does give a teachable point of view for those younger on why we shouldn't fear change, especially when we own our own lives. The fear of missing out due to a fear of change is an uncomfortable feeling, and Coppola and Gersten nailed the message effectively to make this not only a forte on Pamala Anderson's career, but also an emotionally memorable film on a subtle level. I'm giving The Last Showgirl 3 stars. And that's a cut on this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. You can also show support by following me on Instagram, Blue Sky, X, Thread, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. And please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you haven't yet checked out the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and the Movie Wire's crossover show, Back to the Balcony, make sure you do. Again, the link of that show will be in the description of this episode. Until next week, do me a favor. Make sure you stay for after the credits to show the respect to those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film, and support your local movie theaters.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.
Let the credits roll. We say farewell. Join us next time. We'll have more tales to tell.